She's the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York. Follow her voice, a stray dog is nice. She's a pushy broad from the Bronx, oh yeah. Don't be surprised if you wanna listen twice. Make decisions, find the right choice. Know yourself better, find your own voice. It's okay if you need help today, cause everybody needs a little push. From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York.
Welcome, Transformation Talk Network listeners. My name is Ellen Stewart, and I am the pushy broad from the Bronx. Welcome to my show, Recovery Recharged, where we share advice and support from experts in addiction and recovery. I am so thrilled to have this guest today because I know that this is a topic that we have touched on before and all of us are struggling with. The buzzword these days is trauma. Everybody has experienced something like that in our lives. It has held us back in ways that we cannot even imagine. We look towards it, we look to heal it, and sometimes we are confused and do not know how. Which is why I have brought a licensed professional counselor today that is going to talk to us about healing the patterns that trauma has built. We're going to explore that, and we're going to see how we might survive trauma, what we do that may not be good for us, and she's going to talk to us about ways to heal in a healthy way. My guest this morning is Cindy Payne, who is a licensed professional counselor and a trauma-informed therapist. She is an expert in nervous system regulation and somatic practices. She is also has expertise in complex PTSD, perfectionism, people-pleasing, and identity reclamation. Things that you and I have talked about before, but with much more insight. And she is also a fellow podcaster. So please tune into her podcast, Reclaiming Me, and she's going to talk to us about where to find her and how to get in touch. The Pushy Broad from the Bronx and Recovery Recharged welcomes Cindy Payne. Good morning, Cindy. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. Excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Let's get right into it because this is a subject that many people talk about in so many different ways, and I want you to clear some things up for us. Especially people in recovery. We realize that we've spent years trying to be somebody that everybody else needs us to be. We people please in a way, and that maybe is a function kind of like a survival strategy. Why is it so difficult to let go of that people pleasing trait?
Sure. That's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with our early experiences with attachment to our caregivers. So, things that we learned to do just instinctually to stay safe and connected, which can later years turn into things like fawning, doing things that internally we do not want to be doing.
All right, so let's just expand on that just a little bit. When we do that, how does it manifest itself in early childhood? Give me an example of that.
Sure. So let's say we grew up with a caregiver who was maybe distant or aloof or struggled with their own anxiety and depression. And so we learn how to attune with their needs. So if they're anxious, we learn to stay quiet, or maybe we learn to appease them just to get our primal needs met so that things will be calm and consistent and predictable. And this works when we're younger over time. So if I become the jester in my family, then I learn that when I do those things that makes mom happy, mom gets, regulated again, and then things are good until they're not again, right? So it becomes
Okay,
a really, vicious cycle.
I understand. And when you talked about fawning, describe that just a little bit.
Yeah, so fawning, it's one of the newer, coping mechanisms that's been discovered. So we have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And fawn is basically just our nervous system's way of appeasing, pleasing, staying close to our attachment figure, staying in good graces with them. So again, doing things that we know that we don't want to be doing, but we get rewarded for it. We get connection from it. And so an example of that, again, might just be like, I'm going to say yes to something when internally my body is saying, no, this is not safe to be here.
Yes, and we all know the expression fawning over something. And of course, what you're describing is our way of people pleasing and then our way of kind of nurturing ourselves, right? To make everything calm and also to try to prove to them that we can be loved, right? To make things copacetic and calm. All right,
Yes.
let's talk about another characteristic like perfectionism. Often that looks like ambition from the outside.
Mhm.
How can our listeners tell the difference between healthy striving and trauma driven perfectionism?
Great question. Healthy striving would look maybe more like being in choice. And so doing things to, further yourself because that's what you are driven to do. That's what you're motivated to do. And perfectionism, though, is a way that I can stay safe without really having to take risks because it means that I'm only really able to, progress if I am doing the thing that gets me the desired result. But it's a certainty. It's I don't really grow and explore and try new things unless I am certain of the outcome.
We'd characterize this in recovery as an obsession. I have to have it this way, right? Like
Yes.
I talk to so many people that over the holidays have to have the dinner perfect, have to have this in a certain way.
Okay.
Our OCD people, all of these things regarding it has to be perfect or it's nothing. It's an all or nothing syndrome,
Mhm,
which is
mhm.
extremely popular in recovery. Where does this stem from in terms of trauma related situations? How does that occur to begin with?
Sure. So I think it all comes back to safety. If I can just have it my way, if I can just predict the outcome, if I can just know that when I do X, Y is going to happen every single time, then I stay, quote, safe, right? And so stepping outside of that can seem too risky because I can't see the future. Right. I can't predict that. So risk taking becomes a huge issue because healthy risks require me to step outside of that comfort zone and to be able to hold the both and perfectionism doesn't allow for both and it is very black and white.
Very black and white, very structured, and as a consequence, very controlling. So,
Yes.
possibly comes from controlling families as well, right? A controlling mother, a controlling father, and that was the way to do things. And one could not conceivably think of any other way. Would that be accurate?
It is accurate. It is shame driven too. That's something else that I wanted to mention. This I am flawed if I cannot do it correctly, that there is something inherently wrong with me. And again, that can come from high levels of criticism or just learning that if I do X, then I get the Y result, which is safety and security, false security.
Absolutely. So what we're asking you today, listeners, is to examine yourself and to see if any of these traits apply to you and understand that trauma healing can really open up a whole new world for you. Just like talking about, say, complex PTSD showing up in everyday patterns, like overworking or caretaking or always being the strong one. Cindy, can you comment on that a little bit?
Oh yeah. So complex PTSD is it is a type of trauma that is developed relationally. So we are harmed in these relationships, but we can heal in these relationships, right? But the harmful part comes from that pattern of if I do X, then I will get Y as a result, even if it is harmful to me as a person. When I'm younger, I'm not really equating that with harm. I'm equating that with safety. So it can show up in those overfunctioning type patterns, like you were mentioning as well.
I find many times that PTSD can manifest itself in parents who are trying to take care of children and protecting them from
Mhm.
addiction or from things that constitute failure to launch in children. The idea that one has to caretake instead of caring,
Yes.
because one has learned that that means a definition of love.
Mhm.
Do you find that as well in the clients that you work with?
Oh, absolutely. And we don't even realize that we're doing it. We think that what we're doing is helpful, but there's an enabling piece to that, right? It's if I overfunction and I do it for you, then you don't ever have to experience the pain and work through it yourself and develop your own skill set.
Absolutely. And I find, unfortunately, that mothers and fathers sometimes sit in defiance and say, well, I'm only trying to be a good parent. That's what mothers do. That's what fathers do.
Mhm.
No, that's
No.
what enabling codependence parents do,
Yeah.
right? The whole idea of being the one to make sure that their child always has a net underneath them, that
Yes.
kind of control.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other aspects of your practice. Let's talk about, say, people in recovery. What role does nervous system regulation, and I know this is part of what you do, what part of nervous system regulation plays in preventing relapses or coping with old strategies?
Sure. So, nervous system regulation, I think, is crucial because, as we know, the substance that we were using kind of provides this like warm, temporary blanket of calmness, right? So, when we take that away, it's like, oh, I've got this exposed nerve that I didn't even know how to treat to meet early on. And so for a lot of us, it was, in those crucial developmental adolescent years when things were changing and our identity was forming. So it's almost like this getting to know ourselves again process of, when I get activated, can I trust myself to soothe myself? So nervous system regulation is all about like learning your own cues, your own responses, your own body signals that you didn't maybe have a chance to explore as a child or an adolescent safely.
Any somatic ideas to help that process? Where do you start with your clients?
Yeah. So I am a practitioner that provides EMDR, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. But before we even get to that piece, if I have a client that is even interested in that modality, we do a lot of body identification of just noticing where in your body things are showing up, which can be very frustrating for clients that have spent their life maybe in dissociation, not recognizing their own patterns. Another one is the emotional freedom technique through tapping. So I'll teach clients different points on their body that they can tap to help them with that regulation for an overactive nervous system as well. So those are just a couple of examples.
And those things are extremely helpful, and not only for people in recovery, but people that are going through behavioral health
Yeah.
situations. So, Cindy, tell us about your podcast. Tell us where we can find you.
Yeah. So my podcast is called Reclaiming Me, and you can find me anywhere you get your podcasts. So Spotify, Apple, and my podcast focuses mainly on people pleasing, perfectionism, and recovering from attachment wounds that we have with our caregivers or parents. And so I work mainly with women, although there are male listeners as well that can certainly relate to some of these stories and ways of recovery.
And who are you taking on as clients, and where do you private practice?
Sure. So actually, I just announced yesterday I'm going to be relocating to Northern California this summer. So a mixture of happiness and sadness. I'm currently in person in Texas, and I'm going to be staying virtual with my clients in Texas, and then in person and virtual in California coming this summer, 2026. So it's
Fantastic.
exciting.
I know you have a wide variety of clients, as I do too, as a recovery coach. I want to focus for a moment on high achieving people
Yes.
because they're sometimes the most difficult because their standards are so high. They want to present a very content and very stabilized front, external front. But because of that, sometimes it makes them feel so exhausted or disconnected. What happens there? What's the psychological process that happens when that occurs?
Sure. So I can use an example from my own life. I consider myself a recovering perfectionist. I was super high achieving, super perfectionistic in college. And, it got me all the results. It got me the job. It got me, on paper, what would be considered as high achieving. This is a real go getter. But what happened over time with my story is a real deep level of physical burnout and psychological burnout, where the strategies that I was using to get the results were no longer fruitful for me. I was experiencing a lot of internal anxiety, some depression, and for me, it was like I had to learn how to put down the thing that was soothing me temporarily and figure out what would this look like at my core if I could readjust my expectations for myself and what others expected of me. So it's not an overnight process. I can say that.
Well, of course, as always, we know that this begins with awareness, right? What am I doing and why am I doing it? And
Yes.
also to reach out, which is why a therapist like Cindy, or listening to a podcast, or working with the Pushy Broad as a coach at pushybroadfromthebronx.com really helps you get in touch with what am I doing and why am I doing it? The awareness step, which starts. I want to just go back to your podcast for a second because reclaiming me is, and you also talk about reclaiming identity, which is probably what you went through in the beginning in order to find out what was going on. So instead of just barely surviving, what does reclaiming identity actually look like in day to day life?
Sure. That's a great question because I think many of us with complex PTSD had a really shortened childhood. So, in childhood, that is a time where we are supposed to be freely exploring our environment, ourselves, our relationships, our bodies. But when we are just trying to survive, we're not really sitting there getting a deep exploration of the self. And so, reclaiming me is being able to step back and assess those things again, but from a calmer perspective and go, who who am I and what feels true to me? So when I have clients come in and they're like, I don't know who I am, I don't know what my identity is. It's like, what is true though? What feels true to you in this moment? So we do a lot of work with truth, trust building.
That's exactly what I was about to allude to. What happens if I don't know what I want? What happens if I don't know what I need? So you're telling us to come from a place of truth. Give us
Yeah.
an idea of a couple of pointed questions or simple exercises that we can do to really narrow down and begin to rebuild our self-trust.
Yes, yes. So that is very, very common, right? That people would come in and go, I don't even know what I like. I don't even know my preferences. And so we start really small. We start with learning about ways that I can put myself back in choice. And maybe for the first time, you're experiencing that you do have choice because maybe your whole life you never really had choice. Somebody just dictated it for you. So there's a lot of risk taking, but I try to do it in a safe, compartmentalized way where we start with something very basic, like, what do you want for dinner? If everybody is asking for spaghetti, but you're not feeling it, could you take the next brave, right step to try something different for yourself? And it might sound really silly, but that's how I think we learn to get to know ourselves and to build that layer of self trust that maybe we didn't have the opportunity to have.
I think that's really important. And just simple things like you said, like what color do I like? What TV program would I prefer to watch? When sometimes maybe when it's just you, when you're spending a day by yourself. I
Yes.
also talk to my clients and I say to my clients, whose tapes are you playing in your head? Are
Mhm.
they mom's tapes, dad tapes? Where did you get that thought from, right? What am I doing and why am I doing it? Where did I get that thought from? Did that come from something that I knew before? Was it taught to me or is it coming from my gut?
Yeah.
Which is exactly what people really need to do, that self-dialogue work in the beginning. And we also know that every single time you make a decision that feels right, we seem to feel a little bit more relaxed, like kind of shifting out of a pattern that has boxed us in before. Would you say?
Yes, absolutely. And I think in developmental psychology, we would call that self authoring, right? That I get to become the author again in my own story, and maybe perhaps again for the first time in my life.
Absolutely. And that also comes with self-compassion, right? And
Yes.
forgiveness and gratitude, which are huge words in the recovery field and things that we do not take lightly for
No,
sure.
no.
Cindy, thanks so much. This is really very, very helpful. Can you tell us again where to find you and where to listen to your podcast?
Yes, you can find me wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify. It is called Reclaiming Me. And you can also visit my website. It's cindypayne, Payne.com. And it has links to all of my episodes. And you can find out more on how to work with me there.
Fantastic. Sometimes we get asked questions by the audience, and I want to talk a little bit about recovery because this show obviously is recovery as well, and not only recovery from behavioral patterns, but of course recovery from substances.
Yes.
So we've had a question about someone that has been alcohol free for 4 years, and then this experience has helped them in some ways. What happens now with coping, trauma, and healing? What should they look forward to? What should they go towards in terms of helping them uncover the past now? Because being sober allows them to start looking at behavioral health in a whole new way. What do you suggest?
Ah, yes. So I just actually celebrated 4 years alcohol free myself. And I was reflecting on that and thinking about just how small your life gets when you are drinking or using a substance to kind of self soothe and relieve. And so when you take that substance away, yes, some of us experience that pink cloud effect where it's the newness of everything that we maybe didn't discover before. But then eventually that kind of dissolves, right? And life is going to continue to present you opportunities to work through some of these challenges. And I think it's always kind of sitting with that choice of, well, I could go back to the thing that keeps my life really small, right? Or I could keep expanding it with risk taking and healthy ways and being vulnerable with people. We know that addiction is a disease of isolation. So I think community is so huge, no matter if you have 4 years or 24 years, never being above connecting with others and learning something new about yourself. You're constantly self discovering when you are living alcohol free, I think.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing your sobriety with us. And we really do appreciate on this show. I have told people many times that I have decades in long term recovery. And when I have guests that want to talk about the fact that they are substance free, that's something by choice. So thank you for sharing that with us. We really appreciate that. And you're right. Many people used substances to to just flood our nervous system with overwhelm, because it was easier to do that and to escape into ourselves and completely isolate, right? And it made that so much easier, during COVID and everything else. I mean, it really produced a whole generation of people that were much more behaviorally unwell than we had ever thought.
Yeah.
So, how do we now, and how do you now find ways to regulate yourself if you are feeling overwhelmed or overactivated or emotionally flooded?
Yeah. So I when I get this question, I often think about, like top behaviors and bottom behaviors. And that comes from author Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And she talks about creating this inventory of these are the behaviors that I do whenever I am trying to live by my values and maintain my integrity. And then these are the bottom behaviors that are the opposite. And so it's kind of a checkpoint system. So if I am struggling with something and I'm looping and I can't seem to get out of it, first of all, I learned this from a guest that I had last week on my podcast. I try to plead the fifth with myself. So I do not incriminate myself in my own thoughts, right? And that's really powerful because I just don't know. I don't know the outcome. I don't know the truth in that moment. I can't trust my thoughts, right? And so I am going to plead the fifth. And then I'm going to refer to those top behaviors that I do when I am in integrity and when I am thinking clearly and behaving in a way that aligns with who I really am. So I think having that as a menu that's accessible is really helpful.
That's really something. Pleading the fifth, of course, is taking the time to pause. Yes, not holding anything against myself because I'm in that bottom behavior and I can feel it, right?
Correct.
I can
Yeah.
feel that I'm stuck there. When that happens to me or when it happens to my clients, I really think about that pause situation because as an addict, it's always I want what I want and I want it right now.
Yes.
So backing up a little bit, taking myself out of the play, putting myself in the audience, so to speak, and watching myself automatically slows me down. So those are some of the things that help me move back and take the emotionalism out of the current situation. I also try to vow on sleeping on it because the next day it always looks differently. So no matter what. So in
Yes.
pleading the fifth for me, it would be like, I'm not ready to make any decisions around this. I can't. I just can't because I'm not sure of the way to go. And I'm going to spend a little time and distance away until my gut tells me what the right thing is.
Yeah.
And that's where rearranging and setting boundaries and authenticity and letting go need to be, which is where we need. So,
Mhm.
Cindy, we've got about 30 seconds. I want you to just sum up a little bit about your podcast and also what advice you would give to people listening in today. What do you want them to take with you?
Yes. So again, my podcast, it focuses on recovering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that this is something that we might never really quote cure 100%, but we can learn how to work with it and how to lessen the intensity so that we can begin to have more healing than harming moments in our lives. And I think whenever I am working with a client and they come in and they're like, all of this has happened and my life is just blown up and I don't even know where to begin because the rubble is laying out in front of me. I would always tell them, we don't have to fix it and solve it all in this moment. Can we look at what the next right step would be? And sometimes the next right step is what, what you're going to do in the next 30 minutes.
Exactly. Fantastic. Cindy, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you.
Reclaiming Me podcast
Mhm.
for Cindy Payne. Please investigate. This is really important. The Pushy Broad from the Bronx says, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ellen.
This is Ellen Stewart, the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, saying thanks for listening. And remember, everybody needs a little push.
From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York.